Hello, my name is Lumen. On my birthday, our birthday, my twin sister got a luxury vacation to Santorini. Me? They handed me a scratch-off ticket from a gas station. I won. Overnight, I became a millionaire. But don't think for a second that changed how they treated me. What came after was worse than any silence. The lies, the lawsuits, the betrayal hidden in polite smiles and family dinners. You ever realize your family never actually liked you, just tolerated you, until you stopped playing your role? Want to hear what happened when I walked away? The backyard shimmered with a kind of brightness that didn't belong to me. Laughter rolled across the trimmed lawn, mixing with the faint clink of champagne flutes and the smoky sweet scent of grilled corn drifting from the patio. Magnolia blossoms stirred in the warm spring breeze, releasing bursts of fragrance every time someone brushed past the garden trellis. Above us, strings of golden bulbs zigzagged in the twilight, blinking gently like a private constellation. It was the first Saturday in May, the same weekend every year when my sister and I celebrated together. Our shared birthday had always been a double occasion. 2 cakes, 2 names scrawled in frosting, 2 smiles meant to mirror each other for the camera. Growing up, people called us the twins, as if that alone was our whole identity. But tonight, standing at the edge of the party, I felt the invisible line that had been drawn between us long ago. It wasn't a celebration for us anymore. It was a celebration for her. I had woken before dawn that morning, slipping quietly into the kitchen while the rest of the house still slept. The linen dress I wore was simple, creased from the ironing board, not the boutique. I brewed coffee, laid out blueberry muffins, and stacked plates and napkins without being asked. I hung balloons from the fence posts, straightened folding chairs, and smoothed out the plastic tablecloth so no one else would have to. My hands were busy, my movements precise, as if order could disguise the hollowness that had grown inside me over the years. By the time the sun rose higher, Callista was still in bed. When she finally appeared, hours later, she emerged as though she had been conjured by the universe itself. Her hair fell in soft curls, her makeup glowing under the early evening lights, her dress glittering in shades that demanded attention. People turned instinctively toward her, the way they might turn toward a flame. She smiled, lifted her chin, and in that single effortless gesture, she owned the room. As guests trickled into the yard, neighbors with carefully wrapped gifts, cousins balancing toddlers on their hips, family friends carrying bottles of wine, I noticed the way eyes lingered on her. Compliments tumbled easily. "You look radiant. What a star. She always shines." I hovered nearby, invisible in plain sight, nodding politely when addressed, but mostly fading into the background. When the moment for presents arrived, a hush settled over the yard. My parents positioned themselves at the center like directors calling for a spotlight. They turned first to Callista. My mother, her face aglow with rehearsed affection, handed her an envelope. "We wanted you to experience something unforgettable," she said. My father's grin stretched wide as he placed his hand on her shoulder. "A full, all-expenses-paid trip to Santorini," he announced, his voice brimming with pride. Gasps of admiration rippled through the guests. Glasses clinked together in celebratory toasts. Callista pressed a manicured hand to her chest, gasping in delight, then launched forward to hug them both. She spun around to show the envelope, flashing the tickets to the crowd like trophies. Phones rose instantly. Everyone wanted a selfie with the birthday girl bound for Greece. Then came my turn. My father reached into his pocket and produced another envelope. For a heartbeat, I allowed myself to imagine what it might hold. A modest gift, maybe, but something chosen with thought. Instead, I unfolded a single sheet. A lottery ticket, slipped inside with a note. "Happy birthday, love always, Mom, Dad." There was no gasp, no cheer this time. A few guests clapped politely, the sound uneven, almost apologetic. My smile froze on my lips as heat spread across my face. It wasn't the cheapness of the gift itself, it was the meaning, loud and merciless. To them, my birthday was a gamble, a chance, a shrug. To her, it was a promise of the world. Callista leapt again into their arms, radiant, soaking in every ounce of affection. Someone whispered near me, just loud enough for the words to settle in my chest. She's always been the golden one. It was meant as praise, but it landed like a verdict. I retreated to the dim corner of the patio where a string light flickered over a folding chair. The voices of the crowd blurred into a single roar. I sipped water slowly, pretending to study the menu tucked under a plate, though I had memorized it hours ago while setting the table. A cousin leaned down, his voice kind but clueless. "Lumen, aren't you going to join them?" I forced a small smile. "I'm fine right here." Inside, however, my chest felt tight. My mind replayed years of imbalance, the unnoticed effort, the quiet labor, the sacrifices that dissolved without acknowledgement. I remembered long nights hunched over assignments, side jobs that kept the bills paid, favors quietly done for family who never said thank you. Meanwhile, Callista floated through life with charm and ease, collecting applause like confetti. Tonight's lottery ticket was not just a gift, it was proof. When the cake arrived, my mother carried it in proudly, candles glowing like stars against the night. Callista stood tall, one hand linked with our father's arm, while he leaned close to whisper in her ear. The sight made her smile widen, the crowd buzzing with affection for her. I clapped along with everyone else, but the sound of my own hands felt empty. I blew out one candle when prompted, more out of habit than joy. The taste of frosting on my lips felt foreign. As the crowd surged once more around Callista for photos and laughter, I felt my body stiffen with an unfamiliar resolve. Quietly, without drawing attention, I slipped away. I gathered my bag, folded the lottery ticket carefully, and tucked it into my wallet, not as treasure, but as evidence. In the driveway, the air felt cooler, freer. I paused with my hand on the car door, listening to the muffled echoes of the party behind me. Their laughter floated on the breeze, distant now. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply breathed. The click of the car door closing was softer than the applause I'd left behind, but it sounded truer. As I pulled onto the dark suburban street, headlights stretching ahead, I caught one last glimpse of the golden-lit backyard in my rearview mirror. That night, I thought the ticket was just a cruel joke. I didn't know yet that it would change me, not because of what it might win, but because of what it revealed. That cheap little slip of paper, handed to me with careless hands, forced me to see every smile at that party differently. And once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. I didn't know it then, but that cheap little ticket would change the way I saw every face at that party. When I opened my eyes the next morning, sunlight had already begun its slow creep across my bedroom floor. I lay still for a moment, letting the events of the night before wash over me. Balloons, laughter, the shifting shadows of people I trusted. My limbs felt heavy, like my body had carried more grief than a party should impose. I reached across the nightstand, my fingers brushing the envelope that held the lottery ticket. I peeled it open, my heart thumping in mild disbelief. I scratched off the numbers, one by one, methodically, as if I were solving a puzzle. And there it was, the jackpot, $120 million. My chest tightened at the revelation. I stared at the ticket with quiet awe. I wasn't supposed to win. Not in a story like this. I sat up, hair mussed, in the apartment I had patched together with part-time jobs and frugality. The same small unit in East Austin, walls that showed every scuff and crack. I ran a trembling hand through my hair, absorbing the reality. I didn't celebrate. I didn't shout. I just held it. Stillness around me, heavy as a stone. I found my phone and opened it almost absent-mindedly. Social media. My mother's post was already pinned at the top. "So proud of Callista, our rock, our heart." Comments poured in. "She deserves the world." "Love you, sweetheart." Not one mention of me, no tag, no acknowledgement. Her triumph overshadows my silence. I closed the app, letting the screen go dark. I remembered teenage years when Callista would take her successes as if they were destined. The scholarship she bragged about, the internship she posted about. Everyone praised her drive. And me? I was always in the shadows, expected to support, expected to fade. My mind drifted back to when I was 18. I had earned a full scholarship to a small liberal arts college halfway across the country. I had packed my bags, but then Grandma's health worsened. Callista was away on internship. My parents turned to me. They needed someone to stay behind. I had a choice: chase my dreams or anchor the wreckage. I stayed. I watched the scholarships expire. My parents never said thanks. In fact, Mom murmured one evening, "You've always been better with feelings than ambition." Dad barely looked at me. That wound never fully closed. I blinked, shaking myself back to the present. That life, sacrificing, hiding behind smiles, crushed something inside me. But now that ticket had reopened the ledger, I wouldn't let them pretend I never existed. I slipped out of bed and dressed. The sky was pale gray through my window. A soft breeze drifted in. I carried the ticket in a small envelope, pressing it flat against my chest. I locked my door, making sure no sign of excitement or fear gave me away. I drove downtown to the Texas Lottery Commission offices. The ride was quiet, my thoughts swirling. What should I do? To tell or not to tell? Who would believe me? Could I even trust my own voice? I parked near the commission's building and entered. The lobby was sterile, hushed. A woman at the front desk greeted me with a polite nod. Behind her was a glass window, a small sign, Claim Center, verification only. I handed her the sealed ticket envelope. "I'd like to confirm this," I said, voice steady. She asked questions. I gave them. She told me the process would take time: security protocols, verification, legal documents. I nodded, waiting, watching her eyes shift as she glanced at the ticket. I felt a surge of power, subtle but electric. I wasn't invisible anymore. I left the office without fanfare. No press, no announcement. Just me, driving back through Austin traffic, absorbing a new truth. I had something they didn't expect, something they couldn't ignore, unless they chose to. At home, I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of my bed. The apartment was quiet. No birthdays, no family voices, no expectations. My phone pinged. A message from a cousin. "Beautiful party last night. Callista got everything right." I read it, then deleted it. I won't respond. I don't owe explanations. I settled at my desk and placed the ticket envelope in a wooden drawer I keep locked. Then I opened a new notes file on my laptop and titled it, "The List." Not a list of things I would buy, items I would remove, people, patterns, reminders, old roles, who I would stop calling, who I would stop caring for, who I would forgive but never let back in. The list became my script, and for once, I wasn't playing a background role. I sat there hours, outlining what I'd let go, what I'd reclaim, and who would have to earn my space again, if ever. The rain began outside, soft muted on the pavement. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of that ticket press on me. Potential, burden, power. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything. I didn't celebrate or rage. I simply held the quiet and flesh out a future many would have scoffed at. Tomorrow, I thought, would be the first day I navigated the world on my terms. That list would become my script, and for once, I wasn't playing the background role. Morning light slanted through my apartment blinds. I sat at the edge of the bed a long time, staring at the blank wall, heart thudding in a slow rhythm. The world felt both still and in motion. Yesterday's revelation, winning $120 million, had shifted something fundamental, but I couldn't tell anyone, not yet. I dressed in muted clothes, jeans and a soft cotton shirt, nothing flashy. I wanted invisibility, not attention. I kept the ticket secured in an envelope in my desk drawer. Then I walked to my computer, logged into a burner email I'd set up a month earlier. I drafted a message to the Texas Lottery Commission. "I intend to file under trust. Need to preserve anonymity." I paused, read it, and clicked send. Next step, lawyer. I used that same burner email to reach out to a specialist in anonymous trusts and asset protection. I could almost hear other people complaining, "She's so lucky." I would let them think that, but they would know nothing of strategy or will. Later, I sat at my kitchen table, sipping cold coffee and scrolling through social media. I began crossing names off the mental list in my head. People who had made me feel small. People who had helped out of guilt. People who would hurt me if they saw weakness. So many names. I typed a list in my notes app. To watch: Callista, Mom, Uncle Joe, Evelyn. To distance: Greg, X, anyone who made me vanish. I opened Instagram and began unfollowing family. Callista's posts, my mother's comments, every tagged story. They disappeared from my feed. I left the family WhatsApp group without fanfare. No message. No explanation. At noon, my phone buzzed. A group text. Mother's Day cruise next month. Who's in? It was from Callista. I felt a familiar twist in my gut. I typed, "No thanks." That was it. She saw, seen. Silence hung heavy. Afternoon. I went to the downtown bank branch under an assumed name. My palms were steady, my voice calm. At the counter, I handed the teller a certified check, drawn from an account that connected to the anonymous trust I'd arranged. I wanted to convert part of the winnings into different assets, diversify, keep access. The paperwork was legal, airtight. As I stepped out of the bank, a clarity pricked through me. I wasn't running from anyone. I was redefining myself. No car, no clothes, no showy display of wealth. I walked down the sidewalk, eyes clear, heart leveled. Evening shadows fell as I drove back to my apartment. Streetlights flickered on. The city felt noisier now, but internal noise was quieter. I entered my apartment, turned off electronics, and sat in silence. The hum of the air conditioner filled the space. I closed my eyes and let the gravity of what I'd done settle in. That silence wasn't emptiness, it was strategy. It was strength. I felt bitterness, yes, but also a flicker of empowerment. For the first time, I saw boundaries forming around me. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post a teaser or leak a hint. I simply held the silence and let the world wonder. But silence only lasts until someone needs money. She didn't stop. Of course not. Callista never stopped. When I pulled into my parents' driveway that late afternoon, the air itself seemed thick with expectation, as if it had been waiting for me. The familiar brick house stood in the waning light, its east-facing windows catching long amber slants from the setting sun. Cars lined the curb, silhouettes of cousins and neighbors stepping out with bottles of wine or trays of food. A subtle buzz of voices floated across the yard, punctuated by laughter that didn't quite belong to me. Cousin Marley was the first to wave. Her hand lifted halfway, uncertain, before falling back to her side. She looked from me to Callista, who stood framed in the doorway like a hostess receiving honored guests. Marley's expression wavered, almost as though she'd forgotten which twin she was supposed to acknowledge. For a fleeting second, I wondered if she even remembered why I was there at all. Inside, the atmosphere hummed with that particular kind of hospitality that feels more like performance than comfort. My mother moved briskly, folding napkins into perfect triangles, straightening silverware with almost militant precision. My father busied himself with chairs, clearing and rearranging them as if seating charts might disguise the tension humming beneath the surface. Callista barely turned her head when I entered. Her nod was perfunctory, clipped, a gesture that carried all the weight of obligation and none of affection. The dining room glowed under the chandelier, light bouncing off polished wood and gleaming glass. I stood there for a moment, absorbing the scene. The same room where countless birthdays, holidays, and milestones had played out. A setting laced with nostalgia, but also scars. Tonight, that room was about to host something different. Not celebration, not reconciliation, a reckoning. They had dressed the evening in polite words, calling it a checking-in dinner. But the tone of their voices, the guarded glances exchanged across the table, told me the truth. I was no longer one of them. I had become an errant variable, a problem to be corrected, a narrative they hadn't planned for. We sat down, and the questions began almost immediately, casual, practiced, but sharp around the edges. "How's work going?" my father asked, his tone polite but distant. "Is your apartment comfortable?" my mother added, her eyes darting toward Callista for confirmation of the script. Then the pivot came. My mother leaned forward, smile tight. "Callista's been managing some challenges lately. We thought, given your steadiness, you might lend her some advice. Help her through this rough patch." My chest tightened. Help her? After the birthday? After years of being treated like the footnote to her headline, I pressed my fork gently into the lettuce on my plate and said nothing. While the conversation floated on without me, I happened to glance at Callista's phone, resting screen up beside her plate. Her Instagram feed glowed bright, filled with images from her new PR campaign. The captions gushed about resilience, hustle, rising above adversity. I recognized the backdrop instantly: the exposed brick, the worn hardwood floors, the vintage radiator tucked against the wall. My throat clenched. That was my old apartment. The one I had surrendered when I moved out, when life pressed me into corners too tight to fight. And now, here she was, using my history as her stage set, branding it as her triumph. Rising from hard work and hustle, her caption read, polished and proud. Not a whisper of acknowledgement that it had once been mine, that those walls had once held my sacrifices. I sat through the appetizers quietly, fresh salad, warm bread passed around like a ritual of civility. My parents kept asking questions about my new ventures, their voices light, as though the years of ignoring me had been erased. Callista laughed easily, joking about the expense of renovations. I couldn't hold it back any longer. My voice cut gently through the noise. That apartment was gifted to me years ago. The table froze. Forks paused mid-air. Silence pressed down like a sudden storm. My father's brow furrowed, irritation sharpening his features. "You make it sound like it's a big deal," he said flatly. My mother chimed in, her tone feathered with condescension. "We only meant to help her brand it, darling. No harm done." But harm had been done. My years, my space, my story, repurposed without permission. By the time dessert arrived, slices of cheesecake crowned with berries, the soft clink of forks against porcelain, I was no longer willing to sit quietly. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. Its crisp edges slid against the polished wood with a deliberate sound. The snap of paper as I pushed it across the table cut sharper than any words I might have spoken. "What is this?" my father asked, suspicion already creeping into his voice. "It's a cease and desist," I replied evenly. My voice didn't rise, didn't tremble. It was steady, controlled, the way you speak when you know the truth is unshakable. Callista's face flickered, a mix of shock and indignation. She flipped the folder open, scanning the legal language that demanded she remove all branding materials featuring my old home, disassociate her campaign from my property, and acknowledge the misrepresentation. "You're overreacting," my father barked, pushing his chair back so hard it scraped the floor. His voice carried authority, the kind that once made me shrink, not anymore. My mother shook her head, her hands fluttering as though trying to smooth the edges of reality itself. "It's just family, Lumen. You can't treat your sister like a stranger." I met their eyes one by one, holding them steady. "If I were just anyone else, you'd call this theft." The room vibrated with silence. My words didn't echo. They settled, heavy, undeniable. I rose slowly, the legs of my chair dragging softly against the floor. I reached for my bag, the motion deliberate, final. Behind me, Callista's voice cracked. "Wait, Lumen!" I paused in the doorway, but didn't turn. My hand tightened around the strap of my bag. For years, I had paused like this, waiting for them to acknowledge me, to ask me to stay, to choose me. Not tonight. I stepped forward. The clatter of chairs followed, voices rising behind me, but I didn't let them tether me. I walked through the hall, past the family photos on the wall, pictures where Callista's smile gleamed brightest, and mine was always cropped at the edges. I opened the front door, and the cool evening air rushed in like freedom. By the time I slid behind the wheel of my car, my heartbeat had steadied. The engine hummed to life, headlights casting long beams across the driveway. As I pulled away, the house receded in my rearview mirror. The wind teased through the crack of the open window, carrying away the last echoes of their protests. In their place remained only the truth. I was no longer the silent twin, no longer the one left in shadows. The warning had been delivered, not in anger, but in resolve. I would not be taken for granted again. She didn't stop, of course not. Callista never knew how to stop. By the time I arrived at the community center that Saturday afternoon, The sky above Austin had turned a heavy slate gray, swollen with rain. The air smelled of damp concrete and approaching thunder. As I stepped out of my car, the drizzle speckled my coat, cold pinpricks against my skin. The low hum of conversation from inside the building carried faintly through the glass doors, broken now and then by the sound of laughter that cut sharp in the wet air. I pushed the door open and entered 10 minutes early, though even that felt too late. The moment I stepped into the lobby, the chatter softened. Heads turned, eyes trailed after me. I could feel the weight of curiosity and judgment pressing against my shoulders. Some relatives looked away quickly, pretending they hadn't been staring. Others met my gaze openly, their expressions unreadable. I knew what they were thinking. Why did she come? After everything. The room was modest, utilitarian, the kind of multi-purpose space rented out for church suppers or community meetings. The floor was scuffed linoleum, the walls painted an uninspired beige. Folding chairs formed neat rows in front of a small podium, its metal edges dulled with age. A side table held styrofoam cups, a coffee urn, and a tray of store-bought cookies. In another corner, coats and umbrellas dripped steadily into plastic bins. And there she was. Callista stood by the window, her designer umbrella propped neatly against the wall, water still trickling down its fabric. Even in a drab setting like this, she managed to look staged, hair swept back just so, clothes chosen to convey effortless elegance. She held court quietly, speaking to two cousins who nodded eagerly, as if orbiting her granted them light. My parents lingered near the coffee table, speaking in low voices. My father's hand gripped the handle of the urn with unnecessary force, as though steadying himself. My mother fussed with the sugar packets, tearing one after another, though she never stirred them into her cup. Both glanced up as I entered, their eyes darting quickly back to their task. I walked further in, calm but deliberate, my steps measured. My shoulders were square, my chin lifted. My heart, though beating fast, kept its rhythm steady, as if in sync with the rain tapping on the tall windows. I chose a seat in the second row, close enough to face them all, far enough not to seem eager. I sat, folded my hands in my lap, and met the silence head-on. Callista was the one to break it. She cleared her throat and stepped forward, her voice lilting with practiced warmth. "Let's move forward," she said. The words were framed as an invitation, but beneath the softness I heard the steel, the warning. This is my stage. Don't forget it. She began to speak about family, about reconciliation, about healing wounds. Platitudes rolled easily from her tongue, polished phrases that sounded rehearsed, ready for public relations. Heads nodded along. Some smiled faintly, grateful for the performance of unity. I waited, letting her words wash over the room until they rang hollow. Then, slowly, I stood. Every movement was intentional. The slide of the chair legs, the sound of my shoes against the floor, the weight of my breath as I crossed the short distance to the podium. I could feel their gazes sharpen, the energy in the room shifting. I rested both hands on the podium and looked out across the rows. Faces that had ignored me for years were suddenly attentive. My father's jaw clenched, my mother's lips pressed together in a thin line. Callista's eyes narrowed, the glint of irritation flashing quick before she smoothed it away. "I'm here," I said, my voice steady, clear enough to slice through the stale air. Not for forgiveness, not for applause, but because I deserve presence in this room. The silence that followed was heavy, uncomfortable. I could feel the resistance in their posture, the tightening of shoulders, the shifting in seats. But I didn't flinch. I spoke of the years no one remembered. Long evenings spent balancing family finances while others rested. Jobs turned down so I could care for aging relatives, opportunities abandoned so someone else's ambition could flourish. I reminded them of the countless times I had stood in shadows while praise was showered elsewhere. "This," I said, voice firm, "isn't about money. It's about never once being seen." Murmurs rippled through the audience. A cousin tilted her head, another folded his arms defensively. My mother avoided my eyes. My father stared hard at the floor. Then, like clockwork, Callista struck. She gave a low, dismissive laugh, cold enough to slice through my chest. "You always make it about you," she said, her words laced with contempt. The room stiffened, the air snapping taut like a stretched wire. Some relatives shifted uncomfortably. Others looked at me, waiting to see if I would crumble, but I didn't. I held the silence, steady as stone, until her smirk faltered. And then I made my move. I announced the creation of a scholarship fund in our mother's name, dedicated to women who had abandoned their studies to care for family. Women like me, forced to trade ambition for duty, dreams for obligation. I will be the sole funder, I said, the sole board member. No one else will claim this legacy. Gasps murmured through the room. My mother's head jerked up, her teacup trembling in her hand. My father's face tightened, torn between anger and disbelief. Callista opened her mouth to interrupt, but I raised a hand, palm outward, cutting her off with a gesture that needed no words. No, I said firmly. This is mine. This is what real giving looks like. Not a staged photo, not a borrowed narrative, tangible change. Cousins exchanged startled glances. An aunt whispered to her husband. The tension spread like electricity. My mother's eyes fell to the table again, her expression unreadable. Callista bit her lip, whispering something under her breath, but her confidence was slipping. I reached into my bag and withdrew a small plaque, polished bronze on a wooden base. I set it gently on the podium. It bore my mother's name and the official title of the scholarship fund. No cameras, no media crew, no curated hashtags, just a statement, solid and irrefutable. You don't get to claim me anymore, I said quietly, but the words carried, echoing through the small room. Then I turned, lifted my bag, and walked away. The rain had thickened outside, drumming steady against the sidewalk. Drops spattered my shoulders, slid down my cheeks. I didn't run. I didn't even quicken my pace. Each step felt deliberate, grounded, as though the earth itself had steadied beneath me. I opened my car door, slid into the driver's seat, and sat for a moment with the engine off. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I could see the blurred outline of the community center fading in the distance. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking. She didn't back off. She went to war. The morning air carried a sharp chill, the kind that stung the skin and sharpened the senses. The sky was rimmed with low gray clouds, heavy and expectant, as though even nature understood the tension brewing. I walked up the marble steps of the law office with steady strides, each footfall echoing against the stone. My pulse beat firmly, but not with fear. For the first time in years, I felt rooted in purpose. Inside, the office smelled faintly of polished wood and leather-bound books. A conference table, long and gleaming, stretched between me and the attorney I had hired. He was already seated, a stack of papers arranged neatly before him. At his side sat a paralegal with sharp eyes, her pen poised over a yellow legal pad. "Good morning," he said, voice measured, steady. Then he slid a folder toward me. "Callista's suing you." The words landed like a gavel strike. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I lowered myself into the chair opposite him, squared my shoulders, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Let's handle it," I replied simply. My voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. Even the paralegal paused, her pen hovering mid-air. The complaint itself was brazen. It alleged that I had misrepresented ownership, that Callista had every right to use the apartment in her branding campaign, that I was interfering maliciously to deprive her of opportunity. The gall of it struck me. She had taken a space I once lived in, a space etched with my years of sacrifice, and reframed it as part of her rise. And now she claimed it as her right. I reached into my bag and drew out a folder I had prepared days earlier. One by one, I placed the documents on the table. The original deed with my name clearly listed, the gift certificate my parents had signed years ago when the property was transferred to me, photographs with dates etched in digital timestamps, images of me unlocking the same front door Callista now paraded as her stage. I didn't need to argue with emotion. Proof would speak. The paralegal's eyes flicked between the photographs and the complaint. Her eyebrows arched slightly, though she said nothing. My attorney leaned forward, scanning each page with precise fingers. Then he looked up, and for the first time since I entered, there was the faintest glimmer of confidence in his eyes. "We can fight this," he said, tapping the deed with his finger. and we will win." I nodded once. No theatrics, no dramatics, just certainty. When I left the office, the sky had darkened further. The weight of rain pressed low on the horizon. I could taste the metallic tang of it in the air. People hurried along the sidewalks, clutching umbrellas, their heads bent, unaware of the storm, both literal and figurative, looming above me. At home, I unplugged for a while. Silence was my map now. I brewed tea, sat by the window, and let the muted afternoon hours settle around me. But later, when the light dimmed and the air grew heavier still, I retrieved something I had almost forgotten about. Tucked inside a battered shoebox in the back of my closet sat an old external hard drive. On it was footage from a dated security camera, one my mother had once insisted I leave behind for safety. My hand trembled slightly as I clicked through the files, grainy recordings from years past, moments I had buried. And then I found it. The image was fuzzy, the audio uneven, but unmistakable. Callista, standing in the very apartment she now claimed as her brand backdrop, her voice sharp, cutting. "You're a burden," she sneered. "You never did anything but ghost the family. I hope you disappear. I hope you're gone." For years I had carried the memory of those words, but seeing them on screen, hearing them again, raw and unfiltered, made my chest ache with an old wound. I had never intended to use it. I had always believed, perhaps naively, that truth would reveal itself without my hand. But Callista had declared war, and wars are not won by silence. That night, I made my decision. I edited the footage down to its essence, 2 minutes of clarity, no more, no less. I uploaded it anonymously to a public account, stripped of my name, stripped of context, no framing, no commentary, just the truth, laid bare for anyone to see. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. Local social media accounts picked it up first, sharing and resharing. Then news bloggers caught hold. Hashtags formed, fast and merciless. Hashtag Golden Girl exposed. By morning, the fallout had begun. Sponsorships that had once lined up eagerly behind Callista began to distance themselves. PR clients, once dazzled by her curated charm, pulled back, issuing polite but pointed statements about re-evaluating partnerships. Her name, once synonymous with golden light, now carried a shadow. The phone began to ring. Calls from reporters, from relatives, from people who wanted answers. I let it ring. I did not pick up. Instead, I walked through my neighborhood as the evening settled, the light fading gently into lavender dusk. The air was damp, the sidewalks glistening from a light drizzle that had passed earlier. Leaves rustled softly in the breeze, their edges silvered by street lamps. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. I didn't check my phone. I didn't scroll through headlines. I didn't celebrate or rage. I simply walked, my hands tucked into my coat pockets, my breath even. For the first time, the truth wasn't locked away in my chest. It lived in the world, undeniable. I paused under a tree, watching the branches sway against the night sky. Relief, not triumph, not glee, just relief, settled deep in my bones. Because I knew now what I had always suspected. Justice doesn't need a scream. Sometimes it just needs a voice. But humiliation only made her more dangerous. That evening, the storm had not yet broken, but the signs were everywhere. The restless wind, the restless sky, the restless hum inside my chest. I sat by the window, watching as sheets of rain sprayed against the glass in frantic bursts, the city's neon lights bleeding across the wet pane like smeared paint. The air inside my apartment was still, the quiet so fragile that the vibration of my phone on the table startled me. The screen glowed. A notification pulsed. I reached for it with measured hesitation, expecting another headline, another shallow message, another echo of the fallout I'd already set into motion. Instead, I saw something I had not anticipated. Read it. An anonymous thread. Sharp. Merciless. My pulse skipped. My thumb hovered over the screen, then tapped. The page loaded slowly, as though dragging its feet to deliver what I wasn't sure I wanted to see. And then it appeared in stark black letters, Callista's Hidden Crimes? The post was meticulous, crafted with precision, bullet points, timelines, insinuations. It accused her of forging signatures on reverse mortgage documents, manipulating our parents financially, bleeding them quietly while presenting herself as their savior. The words were brutal, almost surgical in their detail. And tucked within the narrative was the familiar refrain that when the numbers failed to add up, when debts began to whisper, she pointed the blame squarely at me. I sat back, my throat dry, the glow of the phone illuminating the disbelief on my face. Stones had been dropped into the pond, and now the ripples surged outward, unstoppable. Morning brought no reprieve. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an old roommate I hadn't heard from in years. Her words were blunt, stripped of preamble. "Do you remember? Signed Dad's name for us last summer?" She said you'd just get blamed later. Attached were screenshots, old conversations, proof long buried but suddenly resurrected. A second message chimed in. Another acquaintance, someone who had once drifted through our family orbit. She confirmed she had seen Callista in Dad's study, papers scattered, her pen moving swiftly as though authority belonged to her hand. I gathered everything. Screenshots, documents, memories that no longer needed to be defended, only shown. And then I did what I had promised myself I would do if the time came. I forwarded every piece to the investigative journalist I had quietly contacted during the early days of the legal storm. By mid-afternoon, the silence shattered. The Austin Tribune's homepage carried the headline in bold, unflinching print. Family feud unveils web of lies. The subheading followed like a knife. Twin accuses sister of forgery, financial bullying. Voices from the shadows emerge. The article told more than I had expected. It wasn't just the facts I had shared, it was the corroborating voices of others, stepping from behind curtains where they had hidden. Anonymous sources described manipulation, deceit, and the way Callista built her empire on the bones of other people's sacrifices. My own words appeared only once, cloaked in anonymity. Sometimes silence is the only shield you have. Across social media, the story ignited. My name appeared in brackets, my face never shown, but the outline was clear enough that those who knew, knew. Callista's carefully sculpted brand wobbled under the weight of scrutiny. Her PR firm, once gleaming, faced a tidal wave of backlash. Clients issued cautious statements announcing they were re-evaluating partnerships. Former collaborators, once gushing with admiration, now posted cryptic remarks. Trust no facade. Gold is sometimes fool's color. By evening, my attorney called. His voice was brisk, almost astonished. "You're being hailed as a whistleblower," he said. I said nothing. Words were dangerous currency now. Silence, I had learned, could be sharper than any blade. That same evening, I saw my mother's Facebook page flare to life with denial. A post written in her familiar, careful tone. "These claims are fabrications. Our daughter is hurt. Please respect our family's privacy." Minutes later, Callista herself made her move. She uploaded an image on Instagram, an old photo from some holiday long past, where my blurred figure lingered in the background. She captioned it, "Family will always be home." The manipulation was textbook. I didn't even blink. And yet, as I sat on my small balcony with a mug of coffee in my hand, the city lights flickering beyond the swaying branches, I realized something had shifted. For years, I had feared exposure. I had believed that stepping into the public glare would strip me bare, revealing weaknesses too tender to survive scrutiny. But now, the opposite was true. The unraveling wasn't mine, it was hers. Callista's empire was collapsing, not because I screamed, not because I begged to be believed, but because the truth was no longer containable. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail. The caller ID, Callista. I hesitated, then played it. Her voice poured through, raw, stripped of the polish she always wore in public. "You betrayed us. You think you're moral now? You think anyone will believe you're clean?" Her words hissed like venom, but beneath them, I heard something else. Fear. My thumb hovered over the delete button. I didn't save it. I didn't respond. I erased it as easily as brushing lint from my sleeve. Later, when the night deepened, I pulled on a jacket and walked to the riverwalk nearby. The air was damp, thick with the remnants of the storm. Water lapped softly against the stone embankment, carrying the scent of silt and rain. I stood there for a long time, watching the city lights shimmer on the ripples. There was no need to gloat. Watching her fall wasn't my job anymore. My part was finished. The public would discern. Callista would betray herself in the glare. At some point, the wind eased. The sky, still cloud-choked, allowed a single pale star to emerge. I turned and began walking back, each step lighter, steadier. I wasn't returning home as a victim. I wasn't returning as the forgotten twin. I was returning as something simpler, harder, truer. An observer who had finally placed the pieces where they belonged. And that was how I ended it. For real. And then I ended it. For real. I parked on the curb near my parents' home, just as dawn's light edged over the rooftops. Crisp air bit at my cheeks. I sat in the car for several breaths, revisiting every memory tied to that house. Laughter, arguments, empty chairs. I gripped the steering wheel and exhaled. Today, I would dismantle what they'd erected on false foundations. I walked to the front door carrying a plain manila folder. My heels clicked along the walkway. When I entered, the hush was immediate. My parents at the kitchen table, Callista in the living room scrolling her phone. They looked up. Their faces registered surprise, tension, old wounds. I ignored pleasantries. I carried no gifts. I led them to my attorney's office first, just across town. The day was bright but cold, the sky a pale shade of steel. In that sterile room, I signed papers legally severing my name from the deed on the home. My share would be donated, locked by contract so that neither Callista nor any member of my family could ever stake a claim. The attorney's eyebrows rose. "You could have kept it," he said gently. I flattened the stack of documents with one hand and replied, "I'm not interested in things. I'm interested in peace." He nodded, gathering the folder. We left quietly. I didn't linger on the irony that many envied the house I once lived in, not knowing how it had cost more of me than they could ever imagine. A half hour later, I sat across from my parents at that old dining table. The same chairs, the same windows, the scent of memories. I watched Callista in the periphery. She glared, lips tightened, arms crossed. My mother's fingers drifted across the tablecloth. My father rubbed his brow. I spoke first. "This is goodbye," I said. "I don't hate you. But I will not let you pretend I don't exist." My voice was quiet, sure. I laid an envelope before them. That letter contained my farewell and the terms of my resignation from this broken system. I had no illusions of apology. My mother blinked, tears breaking but no words forming. My father nodded stiffly. Callista rolled her eyes and spat. "You always wanted to be the victim." I stood and walked toward the door. I didn't linger. I didn't argue. I turned at the threshold. "Take care of yourself," I said softly. Then I left. Outside, the morning felt magnified. I walked to my car without looking back. The engine hummed, tires on asphalt. I drove away from that house, the walls, the memories, the obligation. Later, I found myself at a secluded nature trail just outside Austin. Trees arched overhead, leaves stirring. I stepped onto the path and kept walking until city noise dwindled. Each step untangled knots I didn't know were so tight. Sunlight filtered through branches. The world felt wide. I paused at a rocky overlook, wind in my hair. I held my chest. They gave me a ticket to nowhere, but I turned it into an exit pass. Closure isn't always a door slamming. Sometimes it's just walking away without looking back. Closure isn't always a door slamming. Sometimes it's just walking away without looking back. 6 months passed. I moved into a small lake house in Marble Falls, Texas, quiet, humble, with big windows facing the water. Spring crept in by degrees. The golden hour cast long shadows on the deck. The world looked softer. I stepped outside just after dawn, glass of tea in hand, watching mist rise off the lake. I thought, I used to believe wealth meant proof. Now I believe wealth means presence. I gave away most of what I'd earned. Scholarships, donations, legal fees. I don't carry many things. What I carry now is silence, dignity, the freedom to exist on my terms. Marley texted, "I'll stop by at 4 p.m. got something for you." I smiled. She arrived late afternoon, bearing a small bouquet of wildflowers. She wore jeans and a rain jacket, still damp from the drive. We sat on the porch, feet propped on the railing, wind in our hair. She looked at me softly and said, "You look lighter, like you finally let go." I raised my glass. "Not let go," I answered, voice hushed. "Just walked on." She nodded, reaching for my hand. Later, I gathered a few neighbors, some women I knew from rural community groups, and a local nonprofit team. I had arranged a modest gathering to launch a rural women's writing collective under my mother's name. It wasn't big, no red ribbon, no press flocking, just a table of chairs, soft applause, a few open mics. A caregiver stepped forward, a woman in her late 50s who dropped out of college to care for her siblings. She asked me, "How did you learn to stop needing them?" I paused. The lake gleamed behind her. I said, "I didn't. I just learned I could need myself more." People murmured. Some nodded. She smiled. At twilight, I walked to the water's edge. Fireflies flickered. I pulled my knees close, sat on the dock, and let my toes dip into the cool water. No promise of reconciliation, no apology from Callista, no final text from my parents. I wondered if they noticed I was gone yet. And yet, I felt whole, not perfect, not fixed, but present. They gave me what they thought was worthless, and I turned it into freedom. Some families don't need fists to wound you, just years of silence, favoritism, and the constant reminder that love was never given equally. But healing isn't about getting an apology. It's about choosing peace over proof, letting go of people who only loved you when they could use you. Have you ever been the invisible one in your own family? Tell me in the comments. I read every story. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come, real stories, raw emotions, and the quiet strength behind every voice that refused to be silenced.